She sat in her wheelchair, a birthday crown slipping from her head, staring at an empty room. The daughter of one of the wealthiest CEOs in town. And yet not a single classmate showed up. Invitations had been sent, balloons filled, a cake waiting to be cut. But silence filled the air instead of laughter. Why? Because her body was paralyzed, and her difference made her invisible. But then, when it seemed the cruelty of the world had already spoken, one boy stepped forward. A black boy from a family society had already judged. What happened next shook the entire community, and will leave you questioning what justice and kindness really mean. It was supposed to be a celebration. Balloons lined the long driveway of the CEO's mansion, bright colors swaying in the summer air. Inside, a table stretched with cakes, candles, and carefully wrapped presents. At the center of it all sat Emily, the CEO's only daughter, her wheelchair decorated with ribbons, her smile fragile but hopeful. For weeks, she had circled this date on her calendar, counting down the days like any child would. But Emily wasn't like every other child. A tragic accident had left her paralyzed from the waist down, and while her family's wealth could buy comfort, it couldn't erase the quiet stares, the whispered pity, or the way children at school stopped including her. That afternoon, her parents whispered promises. "They'll come, sweetheart, just wait." But as the minutes ticked into hours, the decorated hall stayed empty. Chairs untouched, party hats unused, her excitement fading into silence. And yet, this wasn't just a story about loneliness. Because what happened next? The moment one. Boy made a choice, would not only change Emily's birthday, but expose a truth about race, privilege, and courage that the entire town could no longer ignore. The room grew colder with every passing minute. Emily's small hands clenched the armrest of her wheelchair, her crown now tilted to one side. Balloons still bobbed above her head, but the silence was deafening. Her parents, desperate to hide their own heartbreak, kept glancing at the driveway, as if cars might suddenly appear. But they didn't. Then the whispers began. Parents from the neighborhood had made excuses. "Oh, it's too far. We already have plans." But the truth was far crueler. No one wanted their child to be the one sitting next to the CEO's paralyzed daughter. Some even said, quietly, but loud enough for their children to hear, that it would be depressing. And yet, the cruelest wound wasn't just the empty chairs. It was that everyone had been invited. The invitations weren't ignored because of a scheduling conflict. They were ignored because of Emily. But just when it seemed the day would dissolve into a memory of rejection, a knock echoed at the door. Standing there wasn't a popular girl from school or a close friend. It was a boy named Marcus, a quiet black kid from a modest family. His clothes weren't polished, and he carried no gift wrapped in shiny paper. Just himself, and a courage no one expected. Emily's eyes lit up, but the room shifted. Her mother forced a smile, but behind her eyes flickered hesitation. Because she knew the town. She knew how they saw Marcus's family. Black, poor, not the right kind of people. And yet Marcus walked in. He pulled up a chair, sat beside Emily, and began to laugh with her over the untouched cake, cutting slices as if the room were full. For the first time that afternoon, the mansion filled with the sound of children's joy. But the real storm hadn't even started. Word spread fast. Parents whispered in phone calls. Neighbors muttered at dinner tables. "Why was he there? Why invite someone like him?" And while Emily finally smiled, the town's silence turned into judgment. Not against those who abandoned her, but against the boy who dared to show up. By the next day, Marcus's family felt the sting. At the grocery store, they were met with stares. At church, whispers followed them down the aisle. His father's boss suddenly questioned his reliability. His mother overheard a neighbor say, "They just don't know their place." Marcus hadn't broken a rule. He hadn't caused trouble. He had simply shown kindness where no one else would. But in a town built on invisible lines of wealth and race, kindness itself was rebellion. And as tension rose, it became clear. Marcus's small act of courage was about to trigger a reckoning far bigger than a birthday party. Because once the truth was out, no one could ignore the question anymore: who really failed Emily that day? The whispers turned into open judgment, and judgment turned into action. The next week, Emily's school held an assembly. Parents sat in the back rows, teachers lined the sides, and students fidgeted in their seats. On the surface, it was a community meeting. In reality, it was a trial, and Marcus was the unspoken defendant. As the principal spoke about standards and appropriate company, everyone knew who he was pointing at. Eyes shifted toward Marcus, sitting alone, his head held low but his spirit unbroken. Emily, wheeled in by her parents, looked around in disbelief. No one had stood up for her when the party was empty, yet now the entire community had gathered to condemn the one boy who came. The air grew heavy. A mother raised her voice. "My child shouldn't be forced into uncomfortable situations." Another father muttered, "This isn't about kindness, it's about boundaries." Every word cut deeper, not just into Marcus, but into the truth of what the town had become. And then, something broke. Emily, her voice trembling but fierce, shouted from her chair, "You all left me alone, every single one of you." "He's the only one who came, the only one who cared." The room froze. Teachers shifted uncomfortably. Parents avoided her gaze, but the silence spoke louder than any excuse. Emily's tears rolled down her cheeks, her crown slipping once again. But this time her words pierced through the polished lies of the community. For the first time, they had to face it. Not Marcus's place, not excuses about schedules, but the ugly truth of their prejudice. And in that moment, as Marcus sat beside Emily, hand resting gently on the wheel of her chair, it was no longer just a story about a birthday. It was a confrontation the town could never erase, because now the question hung heavy in the air, unspoken, but undeniable. Who really needed saving that day, Emily or the people who abandoned her? The meeting ended, but the silence it left behind never truly faded. Emily and Marcus walked out together, one rolling forward, the other at her side. They were just children, yet in that moment, they carried the weight of an entire town's shame. For days, people avoided talking about it. For weeks, Marcus's family endured cold stares, and Emily's parents whispered about damage control. But something else began to grow too. A few children, inspired by Emily's words, started sitting with her at lunch. One teacher quietly told Marcus, "You did the right thing." Slowly, like cracks spreading through concrete, the truth seeped in. It wasn't Marcus who crossed a line, it was everyone else. And here's the haunting part. This wasn't about one birthday, or one child in a wheelchair, or one black boy who chose kindness. It was about the invisible walls society builds, walls of wealth, of ability, of race. Walls that keep us apart until someone dares to step across them. Marcus didn't have money, he didn't have influence. What he had was courage. And courage, in the face of prejudice, is powerful enough to expose an entire community. So ask yourself this. When the moment comes, when silence feels safer, when excuses seem easier, will you stand with the crowd, or will you be the one who shows up? Because, at the end of the day, history doesn't remember the ones who stayed comfortable. It remembers the ones who cared enough to act.